All right, guys, Matt Allen, Tim Little. We're gonna talk to you guys about what's going on right there. Rod deflection. You go ahead and fight that fish. What we want to talk to you guys about today is different kinds of bites. You got a good fish on?
Maybe. We're trying to make this easy.
We're trying to make this easy. We're not. I didn't know he was gonna stick a decent fish here. So guys, what we're gonna talk to you about, oh yeah. Go ahead. Nice fish. What we're gonna talk to you about is some different kinds of bites, but we're gonna talk to you about a method of hooking fish without having to feel a bite. It's something I use a lot when I'm guiding. Once Tim's got this fish, we'll really sit down and explain it to you. But essentially, when you're out fishing, especially with finesse rods, nice fish.
This little chunk.
When you're fishing with finesse rods, some days you get out there and the fish are just freight training that bait. They are thumping that thing. And you don't need any help at all. You know when you're bit, they are cracking it, they're picking it up, they're shaking it, they thump it, they pick it up and run off, that rod pulls tight. You know, there are a lot of different kinds of bites where you don't need our help at all. But some days when you get out there, it's what you might call a mush bite or a no bite, where the fish just show up on the line and they're just holding that bait. And one thing that a lot of anglers don't realize is that sometimes those mush bites, those are your biggest fish because they have no motivation to run. They just come pick that worm up and just hold it in their mouth. So what we want to talk to you about is a concept where you're watching your rod tip for deflection. It has nothing to do with feel. You can do this with the most sensitive of rods. You can do this with 1999 specials, as long as it's a longer than average rod. Why don't you explain some of it?
So you've heard Matt and I talk about this in the past. We talk about staying familiar with your gear, whatever gear that may be. I'm using a 1/4 ounce drop shot weight. Like Matt said, from your entry level rods all the way up to the most expensive, most sensitive rods you can purchase, you're not always gonna feel the bite. A lot of these fish, like Matt said, they come up and they don't freight train it, they don't take it or anything like that. It's just a suck it in and either sit there or start moving. So what you're feeling for, what you're wanting to watch for, you're shaking your rod, shaking your bait, you lift into it, and you know what that 1/4 ounce feels like, right? You know what your bait's supposed to feel like. If it feels a little bit heavier, that's when you're looking at your tip and you're just waiting for that little extra movement, and that's when you're gonna set the hook. You're never gonna feel that unless that, you can see it, maybe they swim, feet away from where you casted. But when you cast in there and they just eat it and sit there, you're never gonna feel that until you start putting a little bit of resistance on there and then see the little bit of movement in your rod tip.
Right. Why don't you grab another bait and I'll keep explaining this. So guys, this is something I use when I'm guiding. I intentionally give my clients that little bit longer rod with that softer tip in it so that there will be significant deflection. Then what I do, and this is what you can do for yourself too, so you're gonna go through your arsenal, you're gonna pick out of your finesse rods the one with the most limber tip section. When you go out to the lake the next time, you'll do what I do. What I do is I begin watching that rod. On the first cast, I watch that rod tip when my client's using it, and I note how much deflection there is from the weight. So when they pull up tight, how much does that rod bend right at the tip when they pull tight on that weight? What does that 1/4 ounce, in this case, Tim with his 1/4 ounce drop shot weight, what does that 1/4 ounce look like? And then I just make note of that. And I begin watching the rod tip as the guys are fishing it, because the deflection will always be the same. It would amaze you. It's going to amaze you. The next time you're out, forget waiting to feel, oh, there it was, it just deflected. Hopefully you guys were able to see that.
So there's nothing there right there. So I just had a fish pick it up and start pulling off with it. I felt it let go. I felt the rod unload. You're just checking. A lot of these times when you're drop shotting, they're gonna load up right on the first drop.
Right.
Throw back in there.
So that deflection is what you're after. All you do, forget feeling the bite. Tim is literally watching the rod tip. We're watching the rod tip to watch for a change in deflection. If they eat it and sit there, it's just gonna get a little bit more bowed. It's a subtle change in that rod tip. Extremely subtle change where it just loads too much. And it's not a big change, but you know there's nothing else down there that's going to do that, that's gonna change the weight of the bait. Now the other one, the tricky one, is if you're watching that deflection and it suddenly unloads. That's a fish that picked it up and came at you. They took the weight off of the rod tip. They carried that weight towards you. Once you see either that deflection increase or the unload, you don't need to wait to feel a bite. Hammer that hook set right away. Stick those fish, because a lot of the biggest ones are gonna pick it up and hold it and spit it back out. They're not gonna pick it up and hold it and shake their head so that you can double check that you're not crazy. They're gonna spit it back out. So as soon as you see that deflection increase, load that rod up. If you see it completely unload, snap that hook set to catch up to them. It is gonna change your game. You will be amazed how many more fish you can hook with your finesse tackle that you were never feeling. And again, you can do this with high-end rods, low-end rods, it doesn't matter, but that longer, softer rod makes a huge difference. We'll give you a link down in the video description to some of the rods that we use for this method, because we choose some very specific models for this. But you can do this with anything. We're talking about doing it with a spinning rod, drop shotting, but I'm telling you, this works with a Texas rig, it works with a jig, it works with everything, but the spinning rod with that soft tip is where it's the most clear. That's the rod where you want to learn the method so that you can really see it happening. Then when you switch over to a heavy jig or something and it's on a much stouter rod, the deflection is extremely minimal, but once you've got it dialed in, you can still see it even though it's minimal. It will change the number of fish you guys are catching. Put it to work for you. You're gonna see a difference. You're going to enjoy doing this. It will change the game. And when you're watching your buddies fish and you're seeing when they're missing fish, it just adds a little something to the game when you're talking your trash.
Are you gonna set the hook or what?
All right, guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.